Hey everyone, welcome to the February 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and we're going to be taking a look back at the last long weekend of racing as they're coming off President's Day weekend. A lot of tracks do race on Monday of that long weekend, so we'll talk about a few stakes from what is yesterday now since we're recording this on Tuesday, but the bulk of the action this past weekend did take place on Saturday at the fairgrounds, and we'll spend some time going through the stakes races on that card, which included that 50-point Kentucky Derby prep, the Grade 2 Risen Star. We'll dissect that race because some major players seem to be coming out of there, as well as some of those other stakes races and other notable performances from that fairgrounds card on Saturday. Then we'll move on to talk about some stakes racing from Oaklawn Park, Aqueduct, Gulfstream Park. We'll finish things up later in the show with a few races from Santa Anita and the two stakes that they ran at Laurel Park on their General George card last Saturday. But Craig, before we get into the stakes action, we probably should mention there was some big news that came down in the racing industry yesterday as the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission did finally announce their decision on the Bob Baffert Medina Spirit case. And for now, Medina Spirit's been disqualified from his Kentucky Derby victory. Mandaloun elevated to the winner. Bob Baffert receiving a 90-day suspension, which I was reading was the maximum suspension they can give for this violation. And this will be appealed in court, Craig, but what's your just general reaction to seeing this news finally come out?
I mean, I'm glad it came out finally. I'm not sure what took so long since there didn't seem to be, they just went by the book, which is fine by me. Unfortunately, as you said, I'm sure it's going to be appealed, and who knows how long it's going to go on. So personally, I just wish it would get out of the news, be over and done with.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in the news for the past 9 months now, and I feel like we've already said everything we want to say about it. Most of our thoughts came out on this a long time ago, and you kind of keep having to rehash this as the story keeps progressing. I mean, I know these things are very slow moving with the racing commissions, and the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission in particular has taken a long time to hand down some decisions on a number of medication violation cases that have just been covered in the past year alone. But it was nice to see the maximum penalty given. I know a lot of people feel that they're just kind of had enough with the shenanigans and the antics and the excuses with this barn. So hopefully this punishment, when it eventually does come down and has to be served, does serve as a deterrent moving forward. And it'll be interesting to see what owners who have supported Baffert decide to do during that time. Again, we don't know when the suspension will be served because there will be an entire appeals process that has to play out. And if it goes to higher courts, that could take a very long time. We'll see how long they decide to fight it for based on Baffert's history. He loves to be litigious, so it could play out for a long time. But you would imagine at some point the suspension will be served, and it should be, because this was a violation that really negatively impacted the racing industry over the past year. So hopefully we can put it to bed eventually, but I think we're going to have to see this in the news for a little bit longer. Craig, let's transition right into some of the racing action, and we'll begin with that Fairgrounds Saturday card that I was mentioning at the top of the show. And let's talk about some of the dirt performances, beginning with the Risen Star, because we did see some long shots win this day, but they were all kind of concentrated in the turf races. We'll get to that in a little bit. But the Risen Star, I thought that the top three in this race all ran pretty well. I thought if you liked Epicenter, Smile Happy, and Zandon coming into the race, or any one of those horses, you could take some positive things out of each of their performances, but clearly Epicenter was much the best on the day.
He was. I mean, he got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure, a slight improvement over his last race where he was just nipped at the wire. And he had things his own way. I wouldn't say the pace, some people were calling it a crawl. It wasn't a crawl for 9 furlongs at the fairgrounds. It was just kind of moderate. Clear lead, and everything went his way. You could tell he was going to win most of the way, and then when he opened up on the turn, it was essentially over. I thought the others ran okay. Smile Happy ran fine for his first race since November. Had a little bit of traffic trouble, I guess, and Zandon's the one who probably ran a lot better than looked with the way he broke and just being wide. So both of the second and third place finishers ran a 108 TimeformUS speed figure. And of those in the field, those would be the two most likely to improve next out, in my opinion.
Yeah, this obviously wasn't the fastest Derby prep that we've seen so far. That honor clearly goes to the Robert B. Lewis. But I thought that Epicenter did run well, considering that this was a 1.125 prep, the first of those that we've seen, with this taking place basically over a month ahead of some of the other tracks running their 1.125 preps, which are typically the final preps, the 100-point preps, this one being a 50-point prep. I thought that Epicenter handled the distance well. Really, all three of these finishers did, top three finishers did, and Epicenter just backed up that strong performance from the Lecomte, where I know you had talked about it on the forecast last week, Craig. He had set a strong pace, probably ran the best race that day, and I think he backed up that assessment in this Risen Star. They let him get away with a much more moderate pace than the Lecomte. I agree, it was not like he was crawling up front, but I think when you compare this pace to the Lecomte, it was much slower, and that benefited the front runner. As for Smile Happy, who was justifiably bet down to the 2-1 favorite here, I wouldn't say that he necessarily lost anything in defeat. He was such a dominant winner of his two races as a 2-year-old that I think a lot of people had expected him to just be able to easily clear this hurdle, but he was riding into some pretty good horses in this Risen Star, and I would say that he was ridden a little bit conservatively. Considering the way the pace played out, I thought that Corey Lanerie did not show a ton of initiative to get this horse into the race approaching the quarter pole. I know the stretch at the fairgrounds is long, but this horse was never going to make up all the ground that he needed to, even especially when Zandon had kind of gone by him at the top of the stretch. So I thought that Smile Happy should probably move forward from this race, because at the end of the day, it was just a prep, and I agree with everything you said about Zandon. He hopped at the start, was out of position early, had to make an early move to get into a contending striking position at the top of the stretch, and I think he's another one that's likely to step forward out of this race.
Yeah, and there wasn't really much to add for the rest of them, I don't think. I guess the biggest disappointment would be Papa Cap. I know it wasn't really a big surprise to either of us, but he actually still went off 7-2 and probably regressed for the first time in a while. It seemed like he was getting a perfect trip, stalking inside, and just had nothing left, and it just keeps kind of pushing that notion that the Breeders' Cup Juvenile was really subpar this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other no-show in this race, I suppose, was Slow Down Andy, kind of corroborating that notion that you put forth last week, that sometimes what happens at Losal stays at Losal, because he had never run that kind of performance that he put forth in winning the Los Alamitos Futurity prior to that, and he regressed here, not nearly as good as the other top players in this Risen Star. Let's move on to the Kentucky Oaks prep, Craig, the grade 2 Rachel Alexandra, and we should just say right off the top that we hope for the best for Lacrette, who was pulled up on the backstretch of this race with a condylar fracture. I did see it was reported on social media that she had surgery, and I think she's doing okay right now. Obviously, there can always, these stories can always take a turn for the worse, and we hope that everything goes well with her over the next few months as her recovery is going to play out, but I know that we both hope that she's okay. But as far as the performances go in this race, just not nearly as fast a race as the Risen Star, and kind of a surprise winner in Turner Loose, who was trying the dirt for the first time.
Yeah, this was not really the prettiest race, I would say, from a speed figure perspective. The winner, Turner Loose, only going to get a 95 TimeformUS speed figure, so the pace wasn't overly quick. It was kind of slow. We can dive into the speed figure discussion a little later as we get to the Allowance race on the card, but these horses didn't look very good coming in. I know both of us were looking for horses that were maybe coming from different races than that prep that had been won by Lacrette, the Silver Bullet Day. Personally, I just landed on the wrong ones, and not surprisingly, it was a horse who had never run on the dirt before, but I guess she had reason to, and for me, it was just a bad race, to be honest.
Yeah, just a lot of no-shows in here. I mean, hard to explain the regression for Dreamlith, who seemed so logical. I thought she was a bit dead on the board, actually, at 5-1, and she ran like it because she just did not seem to run back to her 2-year-old performances. Hidden Connection, a little disappointing. I mean, she kind of fell into the right trip when she inherited the lead after that rival was pulled up on the backstretch, and she just couldn't hold sway late despite getting away with what was a moderate enough pace, and Turner Loose, I mean, I wouldn't say that she ran necessarily better on the dirt than she had on the turf. I would say that her performances on the two surfaces have been comparable, but it was just a race where nobody else showed up. I mean, look at the PPs of the runner-up, Goddess of Fire. I mean, she is arguably improving right now for Todd Pletcher, but she had not done anything special as a 2-year-old that would make you think that she'd be one of the best 3-year-olds out there. So we'll see how good this race turns out to be. And one more comment I want to make, Craig, is I know that that race at Santa Anita, the Santa Ynez, got a really big speed figure, kind of a surprisingly big speed figure for the horses involved. And I know that some runners were stretching out in this race, like Awake at Midnight and Miss Maddie B. But you kind of have to call into question how strong some of those California races are that are getting gigantic speed figures when horses like this come to a different circuit and don't show up. I mean, it's a very small sample here, but we have seen some really big performances at Santa Anita, and you wonder if they'll be transferred.
Yeah, and one of the things I had said about this race was I wish we had some run backs because, as you said, it was a figure where a lot of horses jumped. They're running just a ton of turf races out at Santa Anita, which makes making the dirt figures tougher, no doubt about it. I mean, there's sometimes 2-3 dirt races tops. They might be for maidens, maiden claimers, 3-year-olds only who are doing new things. So they can be tough, and it's certainly possible that this particular figure was wrong. It's one that I have flagged for review, and we'll see going forward. But, we do the best we can with the info we have, and, I have no problem with anybody was skeptical of this one before the race because I was, and it certainly looks that it is too high to me.
Well, let's move on to the Mine Shaft, the other dirt stakes on this card at Fairgrounds on Saturday. This one, the Grade 3 event for the older horses, going a mile and a 16th, and no big surprise in the winner here, Craig, as Olympiad on paper figured to work out the right kind of trip, stalking a slow pace, and it's kind of exactly how it played out on the track. But I will say, I liked the way this horse finished off the race because he was really sprinting away from this field through the stretch.
He was. The pace was pretty slow early, which is no surprise if you saw Silver Prospector on the front end on a clear lead. I mean, he's not a horse who's known to go out to the front. And the race just kept getting faster. It is a race we gave a little bit of a pace upgrade. Olympiad's final time figure was a 1:16. His overall figure was a 1:20, which was kind of in line with what he's been running all along. And decent effort from him, and I think it's about time we see him against some top competition again. I thought he ran deceptively well in that Cigar Mile, and I think he is better than this Grade 3 designation where he won here.
Yeah, I think the big question with Olympiad moving forward is going to be how far does he want to go? He obviously handles a mile. He's gone a mile and a 16th at his last couple of races with sort of ideal trips and pace scenarios, and we'll see if he's ultimately going to be a mile and an eighth, mile and a quarter kind of horse. I mean, it's probably a little bit early to talk about him like a Breeders' Cup Classic contender because he has to sort of earn his way there, but he definitely is a promising sort as a newly turned 4-year-old, and Craig, good call by you on that runner-up Silver Prospector. I'm sure you didn't necessarily expect him to be on the lead, but he did run a much better race after that wide trip in his prior start, so nice to get him into second at 9-1. And as for the third place finisher, Miles D., I think we talked about it a little bit last week, that the mile and 16th distance and the lack of pace could really work against him, and I think that's exactly how it played out. I heard Chad Brown in the post-race quote saying that they're not going to run him this short ever again. He's more of a mile and an eighth, mile and a quarter kind of horse, and I concur with that.
Yeah, he's a grinder, and he didn't get any pace, which makes it any tougher. And I do want to say, you make a good point about Olympiad and the distance, because just because he's got a mile and a 16th, seemingly pretty easy the last couple times, the pace has been really slow in both races, and that does tend to help horses run farther than maybe is their ideal. So I think the jury is still out on him. If I'm with you. I don't know that he wants to go much farther than this. It's not like he's running Grade 1 type speed figures. I just think we don't really know because of the paces he's been in recently. So talented horse, but a lot of question marks still for me.
And just want a quick mention to the fourth place finisher, Obeso, so I'm going to stick to my guns on this one. Greg Foley, if you're listening, please turn this horse back in distance. He'll get in a race with more pace, I promise you, than he did on Saturday at the Fairgrounds, and he's a horse that really needs it.
Yeah, it's a good point. A lot of times people get hung up because he is a horse with an off-the-pace running style, and people think the more distance, the better he'll be. But as we've seen many times, sometimes a one-run closer, they're going to get pace in those 7-furlong, one-turn mile races that we see at a lot of the bigger tracks. So I would agree with you.
Now, Craig, I want to talk to you about the Fairgrounds turf course on Saturday because obviously kind of a wacky surface that a lot of short prices were either not handling or not performing their best over. And we did see a series of long shots win these turf stakes, beginning with, or I should say ending with, the Grade 3 Fairgrounds that was won by Cavalry Charge on the front end. And I guess the big question I have is, Was the turf really firm? It's a little hard to believe, and I know it was officially rated firm, but the times wouldn't suggest that. I know sometimes the rail settings can mess with that at the fairgrounds. What was your take on all that?
We have it as a 7 based on the times, which is definitely more like a good track. Certainly not yielding. I mean, it wasn't that crazy slow, but firm was a bit ambitious, we'll say, by whoever makes that designation at the fairgrounds.
Yeah, as for this fairground stakes won by Cavalry Charge, a horse that was just kind of hard to like off his effort last time when he returned in that stakes at the fairgrounds, beaten by a lot of common rivals that he met again here. But I guess the turf course that he got over on Saturday was much more to his liking. I suppose that he benefited from the prep run in his prior race, and he just took a huge step forward and was able to keep going on the front end, even though the race was kind of falling apart behind him.
Yeah, and before I get into that, I have to correct myself. I was looking at the wrong chart. The course was actually a 5, which is basically a yielding course. So stand corrected on that when I had the chart up from Halo's Image previous race, not the current one. So yeah, more than ambitious when you called this course firm. So yeah, no chance. And I would imagine it had an effect on the results. It's definitely different when it's this soft, and you do get some results that won't translate when these horses get back on good firm turf. Speed does tend to do a little better in these longer races, in my opinion, because the horse's kick just gets sapped and they don't have a lot of finish. So Cavalry Charge ran fine. He set what was a fast contested pace for the conditions, but I'm just not sure how much stock I would put in this race as a whole. He got a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. I think the horse that really caught my eye was the Chad Brown import at Hamo, who got a 116, but was really the only one. He was coming from way back who was making up serious ground late.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Cavalry Charge got lucky to win this race, because the two horses that he was dueling with on the front end, 2 Emmys and 40 Under, who was stalking them, I mean, they finished 9th and 10th in this race, and they were in the money last time out, finishing way ahead of Cavalry Charge when they contested the Colonel E.R. Bradley. So just kind of flip-flopping the results from that prep race. And yeah, Cavalry Charge just took a big step forward here. We'll see if he can duplicate it on a firmer course or different set of circumstances next time. But I agree with you. Ed Hamo ran pretty well for second. I wonder if he's a horse that's ultimately going to want to go a little bit farther than this. And I don't just say that because he was running on late in the race. I mean, based on his French form, he's a horse that I think had been successful going as far as a mile and a quarter over in France. So sometimes those horses want to go a little bit farther, but he definitely ran on well for second. The disappointment in this race, Craig, was kind of everyone's picking here, the number 3 Santine, who people were never getting that 12-1 morning line, but I think at the off odds, 5-2, he was an underlay here, and if you were playing him at that price, you just were not getting realistic chances of him winning the race. And I think he ran pretty well, considering it was the best speed figure he's run so far in his career. But I think he was a little bit, he just had a little bit too much steam coming in on the come.
Yeah, he was actually 9-5, I think, as they were going up to the gate. I remember on the forecast, I said there's no way you're getting 12-1. I was hoping for maybe 6-1, and it was nowhere near that. So, you know, as handicappers, you got to adjust on the fly, and he was a horse who offered no value. I'm with you. I thought he ran fine, and who knows how the course affected him. Maybe he'd be better on a firmer course and run a better figure. But, yeah, sometimes the steam gets out of hand, and this was one of those cases.
The filly version of this race, the Al Stall Memorial, going a little bit shorter, a mile and the 16th on the turf a couple of races earlier, was won by the longest shot in the field, She Can't Sing. And Craig, I'm not going to say that we were too clever here because we were casting a wide net in this race, but on the forecast last week, we were just making the case that you don't want to default to a favorite in a race like this where the form is not that compelling on the short prices. And it was a race that seemed like it could have a wacky result, and that's exactly what happened with She Can't Sing. And I know I was kind of highlighting the positive aspects of her form on the turf last week, and it just kind of played out where she got a great trip, and that was all she needed to be successful.
Yeah, I remember someone, I don't remember who it was, pointed out on Twitter, well, if Past the Plate had got a better trip, she'd have won. But, you know, when you're betting long prices, you need a little bit of luck. And she was able to work out a good trip. You made some great points, how she had run well earlier in her career at longer distances, even on the turf. So, yeah, in a race like this, you can't blame anyone for taking a shot because hey, it was another one where we had said you wanted to look outside the box, not necessarily go with horses from that previous race, the Krantz Memorial, and if you were lucky enough to land on the right one, She Can't Sing, you got paid handsomely. She got a TimeformUS speed figure of 115, which is better than we had seen in the previous race. So good effort by her. I mean, these are not horses we're going to be talking about for Eclipse Awards or Breeders' Cups or anything like that, but it's a good, solid group of fillies and mares.
Yeah, and I personally did not think Past the Plate had a big excuse here. I mean, looking at the pace and the race shape, this was a race that just completely fell apart. The horses that were involved early finished nowhere. Amiche, who seemed like a logical contender, it appeared that she was getting a good trip stalking the pace, but it turned out that she was just too close to it. So I don't think that Past the Plate was really negatively affected by making that big run from last place. She did have to go wider than She Can't Sing, but I thought she just kind of gave it up late. She got to drifting in the stretch, and I mean, she had her chance to hold on, and She Can't Sing, who was a little bit held up in traffic at the quarter pole, she just got through at the right time, I thought, under a pretty daring ride from Jareth Loveberry. I mean, if you watch the horses coming to the top of the stretch, you could see that She Can't Sing is a really tall horse. She's kind of much bigger than some of the rivals around her, and she was just able to push the diminutive Adelaide Miss out of the way. And I mean, no harm, no foul, because Adelaide Miss was going backwards at that time, but just kind of funny to see the size differential between those two horses, and She Can't Sing was able to get her neck in front at the wire.
Yeah, and I think the disappointment, I mean, you'd love to own a horse like Abscond, but she just seems to be the ultimate pack animal where if you put her in a grade one, you put her in a listed stake or anywhere in between, she's just going to kind of run with the pack and get beat a couple of lengths. Got to be a frustrating horse as a trainer, I would think.
Well, Craig, we didn't talk about the Colonel Power on the forecast last week as it was not part of the Pick 5 sequence, but we did have a heavy favorite in this race, Just Might, go down to defeat. Kind of the theme of the Turf Stakes at Fairgrounds on Saturday, another long shot winning in the 19-1 shot Pyron, and a situation where it just seemed like this horse really relished the going and was able to make that last to first move to get up for the victory.
Yeah, and I mean, he figured in this race outside of the heavy favorite Just Might. He had as good a speed figures as everyone else, and I think the pace was pretty quick. Maybe the course fooled the rider. I heard some people on a different podcast talking about the 46 and change. He should have been able to win, but on this course, that was actually pretty quick. We have the half mile coded in red. If you use our adjusted fractions, it was a sub 45, so I thought Just Might had every right to get tired, and Pyron just got the great trip, as you said. Just Might actually got his usual 120 TimeformUS speed figure when adjusted for the pace. Just the trip didn't work out. He went a little too fast early.
Yeah, I mean, 19-1, probably a little bit much on him. I'm not going to try to redboard this one because I did not handicap this race in depth or give out this horse. But Just Might, I mean, he just had that consistency going for him where he always shows up in his races. And I think he showed up here. The race just kind of fell apart a little bit late. I mean, Pyron was not the only horse that was making a big run from the back of the pack. And it just so happened that the last run turned out to be the best run in this race. And he was able to get up on the wire. One more race to talk about from the fairgrounds, Craig. That was an allowance race that took place kind of between one of the two turf stakes, the Power and the Stall Memorial, and that was an allowance race for the 3-year-olds going a mile and a 16th. And this is one that I imagine was a little bit difficult for you as a figure maker, and I saw when some of the buyer numbers came out, a lot of people were using this race as evidence to declare that speed figures are garbage and they don't mean anything because they're just based on class and not the actual times. But I'm sure this was a bit of a difficult decision.
Yeah, when I put out the figures the first time, I said it was a tough card, and the race was part of it. The turf was actually tough too, but a lot of the early races were maidens. As a matter of fact, I think they were all maidens early on, which doesn't give you a lot to go on. But I wound up just playing the card straight. I used the same variant throughout. I couldn't really come up with a good reason to split it. I'm not going to give Andy Beyer or whoever makes the figures there any grief, because I know darn well why they did it. But Cyberknife, it wouldn't surprise me that he ran a 114 Timeform US speed figure. He's a horse who's been a bit goofy in his first 2 or 3 races, hadn't really put it all together, and I think that he did in this case. And the reason I actually didn't split the card is because of race 6, a maiden race earlier, where if you said the track was a lot faster for the Cyberknife race, that would have meant it was also a lot faster for race 6, the maiden race. And I just couldn't see all those horses regressing. They're lately raised horses out of good barns with really good trainers. So that race was actually kind of a key for me to just play the card straight. And that's always going to be my default setting when there's just not a lot of information to go on. I'm going to play it straight probably 99 times out of 100. So that's what I did here. Cyberknife actually got a point higher than Epicenter did, winning the Risen Star. It doesn't mean I think he's a better horse than Risen Star. I mean, Epicenter had handled him rather easily in the Lecomte, but you know, these are 3-year-olds and they improve. And like I said, he looked a lot more professional this time than he has in his prior races. So I'm sticking with that number for now.
Yeah, I think the most interesting difference between this race and the Mine Shaft a little bit later in the day, which took place just 2 races later. This Cyberknife race was race 8, and the Mine Shaft, which was won by Olympiad, was race 10. And I know a lot of people harping on the fact that Cyberknife ran just a half a second slower than Olympiad did, and he got a much lower buyer speed figure, as you said. They probably broke out the second one for pace, or maybe just split up the card. But you played it straight, and I understand why. Even with that pace upgrade in the Mine Shaft, there wasn't that big of a difference in the Timeform US numbers between these 2 races. But I was going to make the point, the biggest difference between these races was the pace. And the Cyberknife race had kind of an odd shape to it, because you could see visually the whole field was kind of indecisive heading into the first turn, and they ran that very slow opening quarter, but they really picked it up after that, and the race actually went a full second faster to the 3/4 mark than the Mine Shaft did. And if you kind of laid those 2 races on top of each other, Cyberknife would have been behind the Mine Shaft leader, Silver Prospector, going into the clubhouse turn, but exiting the backstretch, he would have been, I think, something like 5 or 6 lengths ahead of the Mine Shaft field. So it was a race that featured a very different pace scenario than the Mine Shaft. And of course, when you have quality horses that are coming home as fast as they were and kind of held down by slow fractions, it can really influence the final time of these races.
Yeah, you said it perfectly, and the pace was really not just, it was bizarre in that allowance race that Cyberknife was able to win. You're not going to see a whole lot of races go from the opening quarter mile with a fraction of 95 and the half mile of, I think it was 119 or something like that. So, I mean, that's just a huge jump. Everybody took off that second quarter mile, and yeah, it will definitely influence the final time figures. That's why I always leave my settings in the past performance to the pace figures of the leader, because I want to see how the race flowed, and I like to look for horses that made moves when the pace was hot.
Yeah, and I completely agree with your point about Cyberknife, how he had been a really goofy horse through his first few starts, and he ran a professional race here. They took the blinkers off for this race, and it just seemed like he was much more settled, and Florent Giroux had a much better ability to steer him in this race. So it doesn't surprise me either that he would have really improved in this race. Other horses in this race did improve as well, but they're 3-year-olds, and they can take those steps forward at this time of year. Craig, let's move on to some other venues. We're just going to quickly move through a few stakes that took place at Oaklawn Park, Aqueduct, and Gulfstream. In Arkansas on Saturday, we saw one of the feature races there was the Dixie Belle for the 3-year-old fillies, and it was the return of the Wesley Ward-trained Happy Soul, a horse that we had not seen since the Astoria back at the Belmont Spring Summer Meet from her 2-year-old season, but she returned like she hadn't missed a beat.
Yeah, this was an impressive performance. I was happy to see it. Pun wasn't intended, but it just kind of slipped out there. She had just absolutely romped in a couple races at Belmont, and sometimes you got to question those a little bit because most of the better 2-year-old fillies don't show up until Saratoga. But she had run triple-digit speed figures in May and June of her 2-year-old season, which is tough to do. And she actually showed quite a bit of forward movement, as you'd like to see. She got a 112 for this win. She did it kind of tracking what was a fast pace, just sitting third, a length back early. And blew the field away. Now, I'm not going to pretend it was the strongest field we're ever going to see, but I thought she ran great. Not sure what the future holds. I would imagine she's more of a sprinter, being by run happy, and the way she runs just certainly doesn't look like a horse that wants to go long, but she's going to be a dangerous sprinter if she can stay on the track.
It's kind of funny. This was the return race for so many horses that won stakes in New York last year. Pretty Birdie was the Schuylerville winner. Wicked Halo was making her first start since having won the Adirondack at Saratoga last summer. And obviously, Happy Soul coming back off that Astoria win even prior to the Saratoga meet, which she won that back in early June at Belmont. So it was a long layoff for Happy Soul, but I agree with you. She really ran in this return, surviving that fast pace. And I mean, a 112 TimeformUS speed figure for a 3-year-old filly says that she could have a big say in this entire division through the rest of the year, and she's not going to have to improve that much off this return figure. So definitely an exciting runner for the Wesley Ward barn. Moving on to Aqueduct, Craig. They ran a sprint stakes for the New York breds on Saturday, the Holly Hughes, and this one kind of shaped up as a 2-horse race on paper between What Do You Think Now, the up-and-comer, and the venerable older horse My Boy Tate, but the pace situation had a big influence on the outcome, as What Do You Think Now was just able to shake loose up front through slow fractions, and we already know he's very dangerous when he gets that kind of trip.
Yeah, he had done the same thing last time. It was kind of a tricky race, and I think he had been riding one of those gold rails last time. Set a slow pace, but he ran fast and drew away. And when you looked at the pace projector for this race, it was hard to envision anything really different happening. And that's exactly how it played out. He got a 115 TimeformUS speed figure, which is exactly what he ran last time. All the fractions in this race are blue. His final time figure was actually a 122, but going forward, he's actually a horse I'm going to be looking to beat. I actually was trying to beat him this Saturday, but for me, it would have just been a stretch. I think the pace scenario was too much in his favor, but obviously he's in really good form right now. But yeah, he's one I'm going to hope he meets some sterner competition going forward.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really interesting discussion about the TimeformUS pace figures with this horse, or I should say the TimeformUS speed figures and pace figures with this horse, because in 2 races in a row now, Craig, he's run 120 plus final time numbers. He got a 125 two back and a 122 this time. And if you look at his Beyer speed figures, he's now paired up 104 Beyer speed figures in his last couple of races, which says that he is perhaps the fastest active sprinter in the country. I say active because we don't know where Flightline is right now or when we're going to see him run again. But I would kind of side with you and be a little skeptical of this horse moving forward and maybe judge him a little bit more on those TimeformUS speed figures that give the pace downgrade, because kind of shows over the long run that you want to view horses like this that run these big figures with ideal pace situations with just a little bit of skepticism.
Yeah, there are times when I don't like the pace downgrades for front runners when the pace is slow, but that's why we give you both. You got to do a little handicapping, and for me, this is a horse I would handicap as not quite as good as those final times would suggest, and not even really close. I think the 115 probably is a good measure for him.
Let's stick with the theme of the older sprinters and move on to Gulfstream Park, where they ran the Gulfstream Park Sprint on Saturday. And nice battle to the wire here, Craig, between Drain the Clock, that good 3-year-old from last year who's now embarking on his 4-year-old campaign, and Miles Ahead, who is just a Gulfstream-loving sort, and Miles Ahead was able to forge ahead of his rival in the late stages of this one.
Yeah, it was an exciting race to watch. They battled tooth and nail down the stretch, and Miles Ahead was able to get the job done. He's a horse who is a 5-year-old gelding, so I imagine we're going to see a lot of him. This is the best race he's ever run, I believe. He gets a 117 TimeformUS speed figure. He does, as you say, he loves Gulfstream Park. He's now 9 for 17. He was 6 for 8, so now 7 for 9 going 6 furlongs. So he's a tough one to beat. He's a horse who was coming out of one of those races that had a slight pace downgrade, and had you watched his race, he was one I would have actually upgraded a little bit. But I'm not saying the bettors got it wrong. I thought they made the right favorite. He just stepped it up a little bit. It was also good to see Diamond Oops return. He's a horse who's been a favorite of mine for a while. He didn't run particularly well. We finished a well-beaten 3rd, but he certainly still got some talent. So I imagine he'll have a forward move in him next time out.
Yeah, and it wasn't a blazing fast pace. None of the figures are color coded in red, but you did have a bit of a duel in the front end between the two horses who brought up the rear here, Gatsby and Francatelli. One of those was coming off a big performance, a large speed figure in the case of Gatsby. But Drain the Clock had to make the first move after those two. He was pretty close to them in the early going, and miles ahead was just able to sit back and forth a few lengths behind, watch them duel up front, and he really had everything just kind of fall into his lap. But he's a horse that's always dangerous when you give him a trip like that, because he loves to win races, and he proved it again on Saturday. One more race that I know you wanted to mention, Craig, from that Saturday card at Gulfstream Park was a maiden race that took place earlier in the day, actually a turf sprint for the 3-year-olds, and this one was won by the Christophe Clement trained Big Invasion with a pretty big speed figure for a 3-year-old.
Yeah, he was a horse who had some trouble in his debut. He took a lot of money, he ran decently. He finished second that day, but he exploded here to get a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure. We don't talk about a lot of maiden sprints on the turf on this show, but I thought this was one of note. We don't see a lot of 1:15s. He is just a 3-year-old, so not sure what the future holds. And admittedly, the timing has been pretty tricky at Gulfstream, but they did run a couple of races, I think, at the distance that day. I timed them myself, and the time compared really favorably with a race just a couple of races later by decent allowance fillies and mares. So I don't think it was any fluke. He looks like a horse with some real ability.
Yeah, I went back and watched this race, and this horse just looked like a monster. He traveled well the entire way, albeit with a good trip from his inside post position, saving ground. But, I mean, I wouldn't say that Irad Ortiz ever really had to ask him for his best. He just kind of flicked the reins out of an upper stretch, and he went clear with ease. And it's hard to really tear down the speed figure too much, Craig. I mean, the runner-up, I know he was a gigantic price, but he was trying turf for the first time, so he might have just loved the surface, and the number makes perfect sense for the 3rd and 4th place finishers. The 4th place finisher actually was coming off a 2nd place finish to another horse that we had mentioned on the Pacecast a few weeks ago, High Front, that Jonathan Thomas trainee that won a 5-furlong maiden turf race by over 6 lengths in very similar fashion to Big Invasion. So we've seen some impressive performances in the turf sprints for the 3-year-olds at Gulfstream recently, and it's going to be interesting to see how these horses develop when they arguably might have to go a little bit farther in the future or try some tougher company for sure. Let's move on to Santa Anita, Craig. They ran a few stakes races here this past weekend, mostly on Sunday and Monday. Their feature race on Sunday was the Grade 3 San Simeon going down the hill, so we're sticking with the turf sprinters for now, but this one going that unique 6.5 furlong distance, and this one was won by Barraza, who has just been in fantastic form ever since they figured out he's a turf sprinter.
Yeah, he's just been really good as of late. He's obviously done very well on the hill, but he doesn't have to have the hill as he didn't last time at Santa Anita. He paired up his 1:19 TimeformUS speed figure that he ran last time, so whatever Vladimir Sirens figured out with this horse, he's got him going in the right direction because he does it in all kind of different ways. He's come from well off the pace. He's done it going wire to wire. He can track. So he just seems like the sky's the limit with him on the turf. This was a race where all of the pace figures are in blue, and it didn't seem to faze him because he was in dead last down the, I don't know if you even want to call it the back stretch, but I guess it is. Coming out of that first right-handed turn on the back stretch, he was dead last and just blew by the others like they were standing still.
Yeah, it was funny to watch the opening furlongs of this race because you would have almost wondered if it was the San Juan Capistrano, the way that the riders were kind of strangling their horses and not trying to show a lot of speed coming down the hill. But they really picked it up, as you said, as they came to that dirt crossing. And it's like Barraza just kept running faster and faster, and kind of the way that he runs, and he's got that big white face and the blinkers, he almost looks kind of like a quarter horse that you might see at Los Alamitos, and he certainly ran down the center of the track almost as fast as one, as he was just flying through the late stages, as you said, to get past these horses. And I thought it was a good ride by the sub-in rider, Daisuke Fukumoto, who just kind of rode this horse like he was much the best, kept him out in the clear, didn't worry about the pace, and the horse just took him there. A little surprising he wasn't favored in this race, as the public once again went for Beer Can Man and Flavian Pratt. I guess it's never a big surprise when Flavian's the favorite at Santa Anita, but Barraza, boy, he's just been in great form recently.
Yeah, and you mentioned that opening quarter. When I watched it, I was like, oh, okay, because I had to go back and watch it. I thought maybe there was some kind of timing issue because you don't see a lot of near 23-second opening quarters down the hill, but it was totally legit and made that closing kick just even more, all the more impressive.
Moving on to the recently completed Monday card at Santa Anita, they ran a couple of stakes races on this day for the California breds. The one that achieved the biggest speed figure was obviously Brickyard Ride, winning the Tisnow, going the 2-turn mile distance. And I gotta say, Craig, when I saw this horse entered for this race, I thought it was a little odd that they would try this horse going 2 turns because he's got so much natural speed, but it turns out he didn't have much problem with it. He was just better than this field, and he never stopped.
No, he was good. He ran a 125 Timeform US speed figure. He did it. He kind of ran off on the turn a little bit and just opened up, but he kept going. I'll be the first to admit he didn't beat a whole lot in here. These were Calbreds, but I think it gives him some more options. A horse like him at a distance of a mile is always going to be dangerous because he's going to open up, he's going to get the lead, and he's going to save ground, and everybody else is just going to have to catch him. I don't know what the plans are with him, but personally, I'd want to give him another shot going along because I don't know who could run with him early. We've seen how blazing fast he is.
Yeah, the funny thing about Brickyard Ride is he's one of these horses that is a need the lead type. He's a true front runner, right? I think if he was a gallop racer horse, he'd have that attribute like solo runner or front runner because he wants to be well clear of the competition. He's one of these horses that does not run well when he has to have a horse battling with him or alongside of him. And as you were kind of alluding to, in these longer races, he's more likely to be able to get clear of his fields early, and it seemed that he was just able to get comfortable out front going this distance, and he never stopped. I'm not thinking he's going to necessarily win a race like the Met Mile. I don't think he's quite that good, but as you were alluding to, it does open up some options for the connections.
Yeah, for sure. He had only ever went 2 turns one time, and that was on turf when he was eased. But he's obviously not really a turf horse. I mean, he's won on turf, but he's just run a lot faster on the dirt. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see what they do with him because, I mean, we don't talk about a lot of 125 Timeform US speed figures these days. So, I was actually not expecting that when I sat down, even with the margin of his win. So, exciting horse to me. I always like making the big speed figures.
And the other star on that Monday card at Santa Anita was Becca Taylor, who took her record to 6 for 6 now. This Calbred 4-year-old filly just seems to handle any surface and keeps passing every test that's thrown at her.
Yeah, I just thought she was an interesting horse. She hasn't run super fast speed figures, but she also hasn't lost, and she ran a career best 110 here. And as you mentioned, she's won on synthetic, she's won on turf, she's won on dirt, various distances between 5.5 and 6 furlongs. So just a really cool filly, and who knows what they'll do with her. But so far, she's passed every test pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, she's not the kind of horse that I would view as one that's going to be taking down graded stakes company anytime soon, but it's always cool when a horse can string together wins like this, and she clearly has this Calbred division at her mercy right now, and in the form that she's in, she's going to continue to be pretty tough in races at this level. Let's finish things up by moving to one more circuit, Craig, in Maryland, as Laurel ran one of their big days this past Saturday, the General George card, which also featured the Barbara Fritchie. Both of these races, grade 3 events, going the 7 furlongs. And nice to see Cordmaker get the job done in the General George. I wouldn't say it was a vintage edition of this race, but Cordmaker, he's been in great form for so long, a 7-year-old who really just seems to be at the peak of his abilities right now, and he was able to deliver this victory despite the turn back in distance.
Yeah, it's not often that you see a 7-year-old that is at the peak of his abilities, but the speed figures say exactly that. He had run a pair of 120 plus Timeform US speed figures. He got a 119 here at what arguably, I mean, I don't think anybody would say that 7 furlongs is Cordmaker's best distance, but for a horse who's approaching winning $1 million, it was really nice to see him get his first graded stakes win. He's a really cool horse. I still always follow the Maryland circuit, being that I'm from there and spent many, many days at Laurel Park. So cool horse, and I'm always a big fan of his.
Yeah, this horse, he's been had a knack for getting to the winner's circle recently. He's won 5 of his last 6 now. I mean, he's always been a pretty consistent sort, being in good form, but hasn't quite achieved that graded stakes level, so nice to see him clear that hurdle on Saturday. He did so with a very good trip, kind of a surprising run from the second place finisher, War Toxin, who was legitimately a huge price in this race, but he ran pretty well for second, Craig, after setting what was an honest pace up front.
Yeah, he actually got a little bit better figure, a 122. I'm not sure where it came from, but that's not really a surprise for Uriah St. Louis. He does this more than you'd think. He enters horses that don't look like they have much chance, but he's not afraid to run his horses, and the horse got out to a clear lead and got pretty brave up front, and he was actually fighting back at the wire. So big effort from him, and then a pretty big gap back to the rest. I don't know if I'd expect this same effort from War Toxin going forward, but he certainly ran well on Saturday.
And another feel-good story in the Barbara Fritchie, the female version of that, General George, as Charlton Baker was able to get what was the second graded stakes horse of his career with Glass Ceiling, as she has just been a remarkable claim for Charlie Baker. It took her for $40,000 last year, and she just keeps getting better and better, and she's now won 3 in a row and was able to achieve this grade 3 victory on Saturday.
Yeah, this was a nice effort from her as well. She got a 112 TimeformUS speed figure, well spotted by Charlie Baker. Found a good spot for her. It was a pretty good duel between her and Jakarta. They threw it down early. Watching the race live, when I saw how close she was, I just assumed she was going to wear down Jakarta at some point, because I knew she had a better finishing kick. But both of those two, I thought, ran really well in what turned out to be a virtual match race.
It's funny, Jakarta has been in such a difficult horse to figure out for her entire career. I mean, she was a turf sprinter, they ran her long, they've run her short, and now it seems like that she's found her niche as a dirt sprinter. She always shows up. I mean, she's been good for a long time, but she was pretty game here. I thought that Dylan Davis, though, did a good job getting Glass Ceiling into a forward position, because this was not a race where a whole lot of running was done from the back of the pack, and Glass Ceiling is a horse that's liked to come from off the pace in the past, but I thought that Dylan did a pretty good job just riding her like she was the best horse and targeting Jakarta, who was his main rival. And Glass Ceiling able to get the job done. And I haven't done the math, but I mean, she's won some big pursed races now for the new connections. I would imagine that she's probably upwards of $300,000 in earnings since she was claimed for that $40,000. So just one of the great claims that we've seen in the game. And that's been Charlton Baker's specialty. I know that he had his prior graded stakes win with the Joking, another horse that he claimed to did win the Vosburg probably over a decade ago now. So nice to see connections like that get a victory.
Yeah, and you make a good point about Jakarta. I remember it might have been on the Pacecast, or I don't remember who I was talking with, but I kind of written her off because she seemed to have lost her speed. She was always a horse who was right up on the lead, and then she threw in 3 or 4 clunkers where she wasn't anywhere close, and maybe Mike Maker wrote her off too because she changed barns, and whatever Michael Trombetta's done to figure out that she was a dirt sprinter and get her speed back has done the trick, because she's a good one and back in top form.
Well, Craig, that's all the racing to recap for this week. Still kind of a muddled 3-year-old picture. I think the Risen Star answered some questions, but still a lot remains to be seen how things are going to shake out, not just on the racetrack, but also as far as legal proceedings go, heading on to the Kentucky Derby. And we do have another prep coming up this weekend with the Rebel Stakes being run at Oaklawn Park, a $1 million affair, grade 2 event, 50 Derby qualifying points on the line. I think we might do that on the forecast this week, Craig. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I know that they're also running the Saudi Cup over in Saudi Arabia this weekend, but I don't think either one of us is that thrilled to handicap that card, so maybe we'll look at Oaklawn and see what else is out there this weekend.
Yeah, I'd rather not talk about that racing in that part of the world. Not really my forte, and not a place I'm very fond of, having spent a lot of time there. But don't want to get into that too much. I'm hoping to make it to the Rebel this week. There's some pretty rough weather coming, but I think it's going to be okay. It's just something we got to see if me and my wife can work it out, because it's only about a 5-hour drive, and we usually do go for that. But either way, yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that card.
Yeah, Bob Baffert does loom large in that particular race with Newgrange, but it looks like a good card around that, so we'll see if that's worth talking about. We'll take a look at that later in the week, and you can make sure to stay tuned for that TimeformUS forecast when it comes out a little bit later on Friday of this week. Remember, if you want to listen to these podcasts, you can always catch them on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to that Daily Racing Form channel to get all of this podcast content from Craig and I. So thanks for listening this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up later in the week.